So I want to talk about different ideas around disaster recovery. A lot of times we get questions about how best to address disaster recovery. Now, inside vCloud Air, we have vCloud Air Disaster Recovery as a Service. Disaster recovery as a service has a very distinct place inside of the ecosystem. For example, if we start over here on this side, we've got a solution where the customer has a primary data center, and maybe they even have a secondary data center. Maybe they're even using replication between these 2 points to make sure that data is in sync, either asynchronously or synchronously. And perhaps they're using an existing VMware solution like Site Recovery Manager to ensure that they have the ability to fail over from one site to the next. But let's say the customer doesn't have that secondary site, or maybe they're just looking for a tertiary site in order to create that trinity of recovery. This is when we can talk about the inclusion of disaster recovery as a service. Like I said, perhaps they don't have a secondary site and they're wanting to take the workloads from their primary site and move them out to the cloud. That's definitely going to be DR as a service. Maybe they're taking their fundamental workloads and they're pushing those to the second site using Site Recovery Manager. But they're looking to take some additional workloads and push them out into the cloud. Maybe their highest tier workloads. They'd be able to move those out into the cloud. So, for an example, you may have Tier 1 workloads out here, maybe even Tier 2. You may keep Tier 3 down inside of the second site, depending upon proximity or the advantage that it's going to give to that specific customer. So, on top of all of this, having the ability to do this and be able to do it regardless of the operating system, because again, disaster recovery as a service is still running on top of a vSphere environment. So we have flexibility and the capability to do more with disaster recovery than the customer would normally be doing. And for those customers who don't have an existing disaster recovery as a solution, DR as a service is an absolute conversation to have. The simple way to clue into that conversation is simply to ask them what their RPO and RTO are. RPO stands for Recovery Point Objective, the point in time at which data needs to be restored in order to meet a service level agreement. RTO is your Recovery Time Objective. How long before these resources can be back online? When do they have to be back online in order to meet that service level agreement? With disaster recovery as a service, we have SLAs built into our RTO and RPO. You have a 4-hour RTO and you have a 15-minute to 24-hour recovery point objective. And people will ask, well, Kevin, why is it 15 minutes to 24 hours? Seems like a pretty big disparity. Well, the difference is we have no idea the size of the deltas between those files, between what's coming from the primary site out into the cloud. We don't know whether we're moving something the size of a golf ball or something the size of a glacier. So it's going to depend based upon that traffic, based upon how often it's being replicated, as to how long that recovery point objective is actually going to be. But these are good points to remember when you're talking to your customers. Let's take a look over on this other side. It's a little different set of ideas. Sometimes customers aren't great enough with just doing what we consider a warm standby, which is what they're getting with disaster recovery as a service. They're not fine with just having the workload there when they need it. Maybe they want it to be an instant on type of solution where they're looking at active recovery. Or, more to the point, maybe they're wanting to tier out that solution. So let's take a look at a way you could use disaster recovery in conjunction with vCloud Air to create a tiered disaster recovery solution. Let's say that out here we have Tier 1. And Tier 1 applications, those are comprised of databases, communications, everything that the business needs to get back up and running, because it can't stay down for too long. What they could do is they could use their primary data center, and then they could use a dedicated cloud instance with vCloud Air, and then replicate the storage between point A and point B. Now, vSphere replication probably isn't going to be fast enough for doing something like an active site-to-site. But they can use products like DoubleTake, for example, to be able to create that replication. Now they're going to have virtual machines that live over here and are being actively replicated onto the other site, and perhaps they're even running as needed, so they can have active site recovery. But they might not want to do that for every single workload that they have. In fact, a lot of workloads that would become very cost prohibitive. So they can take their other tiers, maybe Tier 2, Tier 3. What would be in Tier 2 or 3? Well, maybe development, testing, could be accounting, could be marketing. Lots of things would go into Tier 2, Tier 3. Things that are important to the business, but they're not critical to the business as we start diving into hour by hour. And so in that situation, they could use a disaster recovery instance with vCloud Air. And then they're using vSphere replication to move from point A to point B. And then for the rest of those workloads, they have their 4-hour RTO and their 15-minute to 24-hour recovery point objective. So when you're talking to your customers about vCloud Air, it doesn't just have to be for workloads. Additionally, when you're talking to your customers about vCloud Air Disaster Recovery as a Service, it doesn't have to stop there. You can combine the architectures. You can do something different. You've probably heard me say before, I think that the best thing that we can do for our customers when we're talking, as trusted advisors and architects of solutions, is to utilize as many of the colors in the box of crayons as we're given, and to be able to use the ones that are reflective of the customer's need. If we look at these solutions and look at what we're capable of doing with vCloud Air and vCloud Air Disaster Recovery as a Service, using ideas like this allow us a little more extensibility and a little more expanse when we're talking about the colors that we do use to solve that customer solution. Thanks again, as always, for taking the time to join me today. Hope you found value in these sessions, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and to connect with your VMware blogs, your local account representatives and engineers, so they can tell you more about these fantastic products.